7 ways to reverse muscle weakness after the age of 60. Do you feel that age is starting to weigh on your shoulders? Do you think you no longer have the same energy to carry out simple everyday tasks? And is it still possible to reverse this loss of muscle strength even after the age of 60? In this video, I will present you with 7 fundamental guidelines to help you regain strength and vitality, showing that contrary to what many people think, it is never too late to start this change. Is there still time to regain mobility and gain muscle mass in a safe and effective way? The answer may surprise you, as small changes to your routine can make a big difference to your quality of life. Did you know, for example, that the body starts to lose muscle mass after the age of 30, and that this loss can reach 8% per decade? This means that taking care of muscle health is not just about gaining strength, but also about maintaining your independence and autonomy. Stay until the end and discover how to apply these strategies to live with more energy and freedom. Let's get started. So, these 7 guidelines that I am going to give now are extremely valuable for those of you who are already feeling the weight of age. This feeling of the weight of age, I don't like that term, but unfortunately I hear it every day in my office. It seems that age matters. It shouldn't be like that. What I'm going to explain to you is that with age there is a change in our balance of muscle production and muscle consumption expenditure. And I'm going to tell you that from the age of 30, your muscle mass starts to decrease. And these are numbers that attract a lot of attention. It can be up to 8% per decade. In other words, from 30 to 40 years old, you can lose 8%. From 40 to 50, plus 8%. From 50 to 60, 8%, and so on. So it is extremely important that from your youth, from the age of 30, you already have the habit of doing physical activity. Ah, doctor, but I worked my whole life. I didn't have time. I didn't have this habit. I didn't have this culture of physical activity when I was young. But today I'm 65 years old. This is an example. I'm 65 years old and I'm feeling very weak. I can no longer hold my grandchildren. I can no longer play with my grandchildren. I can no longer go to a supermarket. Women very often complain that they can no longer clean. They finish cleaning, washing dishes. They start to have pain in their arms, weakness in their arms. So it doesn't have to be like that. I'm going to show you today in this video, in these 7 guidelines, that it is possible for you to change your habits and whatever your age. That's right, whatever it is. Whether you're 80 years old, if you're 90 years old, the activity, physical and nutrition, and these 7 tips that I'm going to give you today will be very useful for you to improve your mobility. It's never too late to start changing your habits. A very common comment that associates the issue of weight with age is always saying that, for example, look, last year I wasn't like that. So it's very simple. For example, a 75-year-old man says that last year it wasn't like that, but last year he wasn't 75. He was 74 years old, for example. And lifestyle habits, depending on age, must accompany each stage of life. Habits should not be the same as when you were young, because you're not the same as you were when you were young. Your body is no longer the same as it was when you were young. So even though the elderly person is not the same as when they were young, the elderly person says that they have not done physical activity all their life, and it is only now, a year ago, that they are feeling this weakness. Even though I had habits that weren't healthy, it was always good, and now it's not good. So, if you and the elderly person maintain these habits, I can already tell you that unfortunately, the worsening will be significant. In quality of life, risk of falling, worsening of morbidity, diseases, worsening of diabetes, worsening of quality of life. Aging with quality of life basically comes down to maintaining your independence, which is the ability to come and go, and the ability to make decisions, which is your autonomy. So, whoever wants to grow old independently and autonomously. It can be summed up in these 2 words. And to achieve this, you must change your habits. You must start doing muscular activity. So let's go. Let's talk about these 7 guidelines. First, orientation. It's actually a sentence, and it's use it or lose it. Either you use your muscle or you will lose that muscle. I already said that from the age of 30 there is a gradual loss. If you don't use it, if you don't do anything about it, time will take your muscle away. A very common situation is when the symptoms of this muscle weakness begin, the symptoms of sarcopenia, which can be mainly related to pain. The elderly person becomes more and more comfortable. So he starts to sit longer. He no longer does any activity like leaving the house. He starts to reduce the use of these muscles. By reducing the use of this muscle, we already know what will happen. You're going to lose that muscle, and it will be much more difficult to recover that muscle. In the elderly, it is much easier for us to maintain muscle mass than to recover it. Yes, recovery is possible, as I already said, but it's much more difficult, so maintenance is the main thing. So at the first adversity, at the first feeling of weakness, at the first feeling of pain, that you are unable to do some task, you must insist on doing that task and challenge yourself to do other tasks. Move this muscle that is already compromised, which is already showing this sign, this symptom, and move other muscles that were previously dormant, so to speak, to improve your physical capacity. So at the first sign of weakness, seek help and challenge. Don't accommodate, don't sit, don't lie down, don't accept this situation as if it were common for your age. So saying, no, that's because I'm old, I'm already 80 years old, so I'm not going to leave the house anymore, I'm not going to the market anymore because I'm already very old. It doesn't have to be like this. If you, even at the age of 80, start to have any complaints, any symptoms of weakness, seek help, challenge yourself to reverse this situation. The second orientation is mainly for women, because this is very common in the office, in their 60s, 65, 70 years old, let's say in these 10 years, which is the obsession with dieting, with restrictive diets. Many times there is actually some overweight, which makes physical activity, walking difficult. Often there is osteoarthritis in the knee, osteoarthritis in the hip, in which losing weight will help with this issue of mobility. Now, when we think about losing weight, we cannot lose mass. Our weight is basically made up of bones, muscles, fat, and water, making a summary. So when you go on a restrictive diet, you will initially burn muscle. So you're going to have a lot of fat, you're going to lose weight, but you're going to lose weight at the expense of muscle. When you decrease your muscle mass, your metabolic rate, which is the amount of calories you need, also decreases. So when you lose weight quickly at the expense of muscle, you will gain it much faster at the expense of fat. That's what we don't want. So percentage-wise, proportionally, you will have more fat, you will have less mass, what we call sarcopenic obesity. So much of this sarcopenic obesity is related to restrictive diets to lose weight quickly. We know that we often have to lose weight, but it always has to be through resistance-type physical activity and a balanced diet, always with an increase in protein. The high-protein diet is proven to reduce your hunger, your desire to eat more often. It will give you more satiety, in addition to, of course, saving your muscle mass. So the second guideline, which is mainly for those who are already overweight, is not to go on restrictive diets, because you will certainly lose weight at the expense of muscle mass. The third guideline is mainly when you are already motivated, you have already made the decision to do some physical activity, or are already doing physical activity such as weight training. It is always to vary the physical activity. When we talk about bodybuilding, we always think of a gym with a lot of weights, dumbbells, lifting, pulling weights. Often the weight of your own body can contribute to this resistance exercise, to bodybuilding exercise. Example, an activity, a squat exercise. You are using your own body weight, lowering and lifting to strengthen the muscles of your lower limbs. Another example is, for example, elastic bands. We are using the resistance of an elastic band so that we can contract the muscle and challenge this muscle against this movement, this activity that is resisted. Besides, as I already said, you can also use weights, dumbbells, always using them to promote muscular resistance and always challenge, vary the exercises so that you can recruit other muscles, not just the same muscle. This recruitment of muscles improves our neuromuscular connection. So we work so hard on our brain in this connection with the muscle. So it is always important when you are already doing activity, resisted physical activity, to always vary the training so that it works different muscle groups and recruits other muscles, favoring this integration of our brain and our muscle mass, our muscle. This type of variation is extremely important to avoid falling. Why? Because he works a lot on the issue of balance. When we fall, when an elderly person falls, for example, It is when our point of balance moves away from our body's center of gravity, and we end up not having the necessary reflex and contraction to return this center of gravity to its position. Standing, for example. So, this is the main mechanism for elderly people to fall when related to the loss of muscle mass. Of course, I'm not talking about an accident, being run over, for example. I'm really talking about a fall from one's own height, even related to when we trip. When a trip occurs, for example, the younger person loses his balance. As he used to say, he throws a stick and is often able to regain his balance, returning to that center of gravity. When there is no synchrony between the brain and muscles, there is a risk of falling, which of course is related to all that complication that I've already talked about in other classes when the elderly person falls. Another important tip, another important guideline, which I have already talked about in other classes as well, is to increase the protein portion of each meal. As you age, your protein needs change. So while when you were younger, 0.8 to 1 gram of protein per kilogram of weight, let's say 20 grams of protein per meal was already enough, with aging, due to this metabolic imbalance, the elderly need more protein. So while in the past, for example, when you were young you needed 20, today you need 30, plus or minus 1.5 grams of protein per weight. So there's no point in doing physical activity. There's no point in challenging yourself with different activities if you don't increase your protein intake. In other words, protein is our building blocks for building muscle mass. If we don't have bricks, we will consume this muscle to generate energy. Therefore, the elderly need a metaprotein. I've already taught you how to calculate in other videos. I'll tell you quickly. We will take our weight, take a calculator and multiply, for example, 70 kilos multiplied by 1.5. Then we will have the goal, which in this example of an elderly person weighing 70 kilos, is more or less 100 to 105 grams of protein per kilo. Another guideline is not to consume all of this protein in a single meal, because the maximum we can absorb is 30 to 40 grams per meal. So there is no point in taking these 100 grams and still ingesting them in one meal, because it will not be absorbed. Therefore, this metaprotein must be distributed throughout the day in the main meals. For example, for breakfast, lunch, a snack, an afternoon supper and dinner, always enrich this meal with protein. I have received many comments, unfortunately, that we know the financial situation of many subscribers, many students, many elderly people who are watching, who often, due to the increased cost, are unable to have this protein. So, it's a social issue. But unfortunately, to maintain adequate muscle mass, mobility and quality of aging, we must, it is recommended, have this protein intake, this metaprotein during the day. Because we know that in most cases, because the elderly already have a decrease in physiological appetite, there is a reduction in the digestive tract, a delay in digestion, so the elderly tend to eat less. So many times we have to resort to some extra meal supplements, that is, at times other than meals, so that we can achieve this goal, so that we can maintain muscle mass, and of course, in the best case scenario, we can build muscle mass. The fifth guideline is to always do a stretching activity. So this stretching in the joints, this stretching in the muscle, which will be worked on, which will be done physical activity, before and after physical activity, causes greater stimulation to occur even for the fixation of proteins, the fixation of the food that we eat to build muscle after training. So, stretching, in addition to improving the issue of walking, reducing the risk of falling, improving pain, because pain is often related to muscle contractures, greatly favors the issue of muscle formation and maintenance post-bodybuilding and before bodybuilding. So this guideline is to always stretch. Stretching can be done even on days when you're not going to do weight training. Remembering that resistance-type physical activity such as bodybuilding is always important to have a period of rest to relax these muscles. So this muscle needs recovery time so it can develop, which is basically, I'll summarize it a lot, the formation of a muscle hypertrophy. We're going to cause a muscle injury. In this muscle injury, the body will understand that this injury, we will need to recover this muscle. And in this recovery, we will fix more amino acids, and this will translate into swelling, increase, and improvement in strength. So this is the fifth tip, the fifth stretching guideline to promote the formation of mass and the maintenance of your muscles. And during this recovery period between workouts, the ideal is to do a cardiovascular type of physical activity, for example, walking. And I'm going to talk here again, I've been talking a lot about bodybuilding, resistance exercises, but walking is one of the most important exercises for the elderly. Have you ever realized how complex walking is? We have to have perfect integration between our cognition, that is where we want to go. We have to integrate this command in the brain so that the specific muscles of our body are contracted and relaxed, so that balance is maintained. And logically, we have to work on nourishing these muscles through the blood, through our heart pump, which is the heart. So it basically integrates all of our systems, the brain, muscles, and our heart, improving our cardiopulmonary conditioning. So walking is extremely important to do between weight training exercises and resistance exercises. The sixth guideline is to be strategic when it comes to eating, especially when it comes to protein intake. So we have to coordinate our diet, and when taking supplements, coordinate this supplementation with training. For example, exercising on an empty stomach is the biggest mistake that can be made for elderly people who want to gain muscle mass. When we exercise, when our body starts to produce movement, it needs energy. Our fastest source of energy, which is sugar, glucose, which are carbohydrates. If we are fasting, our body will start. Our metabolism will start to break down our muscle to transform it into glucose, which is our energy, to need to make the movement, so we will end up consuming muscle when we train on an empty stomach. So the ideal is to have a diet before training, especially with carbohydrates. So a diet with rice, a diet with pasta, these are carbohydrates that will help provide energy to make movements. Always eat carbohydrates and protein too before training. After training, after physical activity, it is also important to ingest, especially proteins, as these proteins are the building blocks that our body will need to build all our muscles. So it's as if at the beginning we need energy. We stimulate the muscle, and the muscle after training will need it to rebuild this injury that was produced by the stimulus. It will need these little bricks that are proteins to be able to assemble and build muscle mass. So you need, in addition to making metaproteins, in addition to eating, as I already explained, you mainly need to be strategic when it comes to eating. To provide nutrients at the moment your body will need them most. And the seventh and final tip is for you to take advantage of your rest time between training sessions to stay active. It doesn't mean that those days when you're not going to train are days to do nothing, to stay in bed. None of that. You have to change your habits. So take advantage of these days to take lighter walks outdoors, social interactions. Of course, in addition to working on our muscles and our mobility, we also have to work on our mind to preserve our memories, to reduce the risk of dementia and Alzheimer's. So we need a lot of stimulus. So it is essential to change your habits. For example, on days when you are not training, on the weekend, on Saturday, on Sunday, on days when there is no gym open, for example, do activities in which you will move, in which you will have a stimulus. In this stimulus, I mention walking again. Walking is an exercise that will give the muscle the time it needs to recover. It will work a lot on the cardiovascular part, all of our cardiovascular conditioning, and will help you maintain that mobility. So more important than starting physical activity thinking about the future, you will have to maintain new habits. You will have to maintain this change persistently, so it goes far beyond just doing activity. You will have to completely change your lifestyle, your habits, often your mind, so that it fits into this new habit to recover your muscle mass. So I am absolutely sure that if you really incorporate these guidelines, of course with appropriate guidance, but incorporate it as a change of habit, as a change in lifestyle, you, regardless of your age, will be able to maintain it, and you will be able to recover your mobility and, above all, quality of life. Of course, I'm talking about conditions that are not related to neurological conditions. A stroke, I'm generally talking about when this is directly related to muscle weakness, sarcopenia, that doesn't have any associated neurological damage. Although physical activity is also recommended for these conditions of neurological sequelae to improve functionality within the limitations that the disease may have caused, obviously. So if you've made it this far, comment below that I'm going to fight against sarcopenia. I want and have a mission to reach as many elderly people as possible, because I experience this on a daily basis. I know how much sarcopenia takes away quality time, takes away quality of life from our elderly people. In addition to, of course, inferring and derive risks in relation to increased morbidity, increased mortality, related to falls, related to lack of control of metabolic diseases, actually related even to memory issues, cognitive issues that are also directly related to the decrease of muscle mass and strength. So like it, share it now. And if you haven't signed up yet, sign up weekly. I am providing guidance for you who are suffering from this problem and want to reverse it, want to change your life. So thank you very much to those of you who stayed this far. Stay with God and see you in the next video.